Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for everyone for joining our session today. We hope it will be an engaging one. This is enabling upward social mobility through creating a culture of opportunity. Before we get in to all of our content today, I would like to do a special thank you to our global sponsors. We have Munich Re, Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers, Swiss Re, Sampo International, and Aon and Chubb. I am thrilled to be here with you all today. My name is Kelly Smoots Stixrud. I am our head of colleague experience for our global groups at Aon, and I am joined today by our fantastic speakers. We have Steph Owen, operations leader for Wealth Solutions and chair of the UK Social Mobility Network. We have Billy Dexter, an esteemed author and partner at Heidrick Struggles, Katherine Conway, our global head of inclusion and culture initiatives at Aon, and last but certainly not least, we have Victoria Alexander, a new apprentice at Aon. Thank you all so much for your passion around this topic and for your time today. So I want to jump right into our conversation, keep it engaging for all of you, and start with the basics. What is social mobility? We talk about it a lot. It seems like it's been a buzzword, but what does it actually mean? So we have the definition here in front of us to give us an idea of what social mobility, generally speaking, means. But I'm going to pass it to Katherine Conway to give us a deeper understanding of the concept of social mobility and what it means for this audience in particular. So Katherine, what is social mobility to you? Why is it important, and what's the business case here?
Great, thanks Kelly. Great to be with you all today. So why social mobility? I think hopefully most of us will now understand the business case for driving workforce diversity. And we should be aware of why diversity of thought, experience, background, and perspective is great for business. But what is social mobility and how should we think about it? So I just want to unpick it a little to introduce the topic. You'll know that mobility stands for shift or change or movement. And the change may be of a place or from one position to another. But when we prefix social along with mobility, it would imply that people or an individual occupying a social position move to another position or status. And mobility may be considered in different senses, such as a change in occupation that involves a consequent change in status, or a promotion within the same occupational group, or the accumulation of seniority within a given occupation, or a change in occupation from one generation to another. That's the most popular definition. A change in occupation from one generation to another, as from father and son, in terms of either horizontal mobility, so changing your job or profession, but your standing stays the same because it's horizontal. Vertical mobility, so thinking about ascending or descending mobility, and that's in the form of social climbing or social sinking, which is upward mobility or downward mobility. Intergenerational mobility is something that happens frequently and what we see. So one generation changes its social standing compared to the previous. But there's many reasons for social mobility. But as large, successful organisations that come together for Dive-In, we have a responsibility to help social mobility through education, through skills, through training and opportunity. And in terms of the business case, we know diversity of thought is essential for driving innovation and creativity. We need to avoid groupthink and build a culture where everyone is valued, can contribute, and be authentic. And we know that diversity of thought has been proven to deliver more successful businesses. So to discount talent from lower socioeconomic backgrounds is limiting. And we still end up looking at the same talent pools. But given the Great Resignation and the war on talent, great talent is really hard to come by. So why are we not more open to enabling social mobility and recognizing that there is great talent in all social classes. Thank you for being here today to learn more. As we move through today's session, I want you to think about your own background and your own biases around classism and what assumptions might be around people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Remember, in each person, there's potential. So that's my definition, Kelly. With that, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, Katherine, for that helpful context and really helping us set the stage for why we are all here today. I would like to pass to Victoria next to shed some light on the current statistics, at least in the US, on social mobility. But before I do, we want to share a video to help illustrate the current social mobility landscape in the US. So I will pass it to the producer to start our short video.
We're going to talk about inequality and opportunity in America. Let's start by dividing the population up into 5 equally sized slices. If you're boring like me, you might call them quintiles. In an absolutely equal society where everybody had the same amount of money, each fifth of the distribution would get a fifth of the money. It would look like this. Of course, that's not how it is. In the real world, the bottom quintile, the bottom fifth, gets 5% of the money, and the top fifth get more than half the money. But I think in terms of fairness, and certainly in terms of American fairness, the question's less what's the gap between the bottom and the top, and it's more what are your chances of making it from the bottom to the top? How mobile is society? How far does where you're born on the ladder affect where you end up on the ladder? So in a perfectly mobile society, an opportunity utopia, being born down here in the bottom quintile would have no effect on where you ended up. You'd be equally likely to make it to the top as to stay at the bottom. But now I want to show you what it's really like. Right now, for the people born at the bottom, more than 1 in 3 of them will remain stuck at the bottom, and just 1 in 10 are going to make it all the way up to the top. That's bad enough, but it's even worse for certain groups in the population. If you're born in the bottom quintile and you're a black American, you have a 50% chance of remaining stuck at the bottom and just a 3% chance of making it Horatio Alger style all the way to the top. So this is the picture for black America. For white Americans, the picture looks close to that utopia with roughly the same chances of making it to the top of the distribution as of being stuck at the bottom. Those who are born at the bottom and are raised by parents who are never married. And for that group, the odds of making it to the top are pretty slim as well. For them, it looks like this. For those raised by married parents, it looks like this. Again, it's pretty close to what you might hope for in a perfectly mobile society. Those who are born at the bottom, if they're raised by married parents, have a pretty good chance of making it to the top. So if you don't complete high school, there's a 50% chance you're going to stay stuck at the bottom if you were born at the bottom, and a 1% chance that you're going to make it to the top 20% of the income distribution as an adult yourself. So for them, it looks like this. If you're born at the bottom, born in this bottom fifth, but you're one of the few born down here who managed to get a 4-year college degree, transforms your chances of moving up the income distribution. Go to college. We can have a long argument about the gap between the rich and the poor, but I think we can all agree that we don't want to live in a society where you're born determines so strongly your chances in life of where you end up. America has a dream of equal opportunity, and we're a very long way right now from that dream. We have a big problem, and we need big solutions.
All right, Victoria, over to you on some more statistics.
Thanks, Kelly. Before we get into the statistics, just to reiterate, I'm Victoria Alexander. I'm 20 years old. I'm a new employee with the Aon Apprenticeship Program as a recruiter on the early careers team. So we've heard a bit about what social mobility means, but what does it look like in action in the US? As you saw in the video, it isn't as simple as pulling yourself up by your bootstraps with the American dream. The wealthy are getting wealthier, and more people are becoming poorer rather than moving up in their economic stations. The chances of someone like myself moving up is a statistical anomaly. The roots of poverty in America and across the world starts with quality education. According to the globalcitizen.org, quote, families living in poverty must often choose between sending their child to school or providing other basic needs, even if families do not have to pay tuition fees. Even worse so, in the US, your quality of education is based on what neighborhood you can afford to live in. Public schools are only funded by the people's local taxes. So if your tax base is low, you automatically get an underfunded and often overcrowded education. While ones who live in better neighborhoods will always have more resources, better education, and better knowledge on how to survive in the working world. Let's dig deeper into this scenario where the tax base is very low. When that child graduates from high school and seeks college or a job, the very high school that did not have many extracurricular programs or quality learning environments for strong test scores leaves the student unable to compete against many applicants to top universities and colleges who had access to those various programs. Families able to afford to move to better school districts exponentially increase their child's chances of mobility. Census.gov states moving from a below average to an above average neighborhood at birth increases a child's lifetime earnings by $200,000. And that's if and only if it can be afforded. And worse still, traditional indicators of economic growth, such as job growth, don't always translate to greater upward mobility. There is no association between low-income children's earnings in adulthood and their job growth rates across cities. Even in a booming economy, it does not correlate to increased mobility outcomes for those groups. Often children who grow up in the same neighborhoods attending the same schools are but a minority, do not face upward mobility evenly against their white peers. We need more assistance in our government programs to help bridge the gap that minorities are facing. Currently, the U.S. has two major programs to help in these ways, the EBT and WIC. WIC stands for Women, Infants, and Children, and EBT stands for Electronic Benefits Transfer. WIC and EBT are similar, and the programs are to aid nutritional requirements for those in need. The main difference being WIC provides specific items from an approved list for children and their mothers, while EBT provides a dollar amount of only for food and beverage. WIC allots items such as baby formula, milk, and more specific items like fresh fruits and veggies. Anyone can apply for EBT. Applicants are given a cash value monthly per individual in your household for groceries. According to the Center on Budget and Priorities, the average benefit from EBT was around $121 per individual. Keep in mind these programs give a monthly benefit. It comes out to only about $1.40 per person per meal. And according to the USDA, WIC and EBT incomes average about $1,133 for one individual, and for two individuals, it's $1,526 a month. These benefit thresholds need to change, as they quite frankly don't cover enough. We need more to cover the gaps in these communities facing so many factors to help push down the poor and keep wealth into those who have already large pockets. And I'll pass it back to you, Kelly.
Thank you, Victoria. Those are some pretty eye-opening statistics for me, especially. I think now what I would like to do is let's hear some of the personal stories from our panelists around their social mobility experiences. So, Billy, we're going to start with you. What is your story?
Well, thank you, Kelly. I'd like to share just a few insights around my story and my journey. But before I get into that, as we were talking through the panel, we talked about this concept of we don't look like our stories. And, some of you may have heard that, but when you peel this back, everybody has a story. And some of us own our stories and some of us don't. But it's really knowing someone's story, and creating a culture of understanding, that helps that individual really kind of, get, embrace their story and really live with that. One of the quotes that I have in my office here is, it says, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you, by Maya Angelou. And so as my colleagues were talking about the definition of upward mobility and the statistics around, uh, uh, as people, come up through poverty and have success, after years of, navigating, I finally decided to embrace my own story, which is one that I know now is one of success and as I've shared it, significant accomplishment. But when it's your own story, you want to manage that. You want people to know what you want them to know, but not to know the full story. So I'll start off by saying that I'm a partner at one of the largest global executive search firms in the world, where companies hire us to find leadership talent, and a lot of it is relationship based. And we place CEOs, board of directors, and C-suite executives around the world. But my story didn't start there. Some of the statistics that were being shared on the video, I'm a representative of that. I grew up in the inner city of Detroit, the fourth of five kids of two parents who came to Detroit in the early 50s as part of the Great Migration from Alabama. Neither one of my parents had a college degree. Neither one had finished high school. My father ended up getting a GED. Two sisters and an older brother who never graduated high school. I think the highest that they ever achieved was the 10th grade, and they dropped out. And the rest of their life was about having a job, and hopefully having a job with benefits. And then I have a younger brother who, all the way till we were about 14, my relatives and everybody called us the twins because we were only 10 months apart. But I was significantly, maybe 5 years younger than my oldest, my sister that was the closest to me. So you have five kids who have five different journeys. And I'll try and give you this real quickly. But so my parents were divorced when I was 12 years old. My older brothers and sisters, two sisters and brother, had all been out of the house. And so it was my mother and my younger brother. I was 12 and he was 11. And we were on welfare in Detroit and trying to figure out how to make it. And my mother sat us down and said, look, hey, it's just the three of us now. You've got to figure out what you're going to do. But Mama's going to do whatever she can to take care of you boys until you're 18. And at 18, you'll be a man. And you've got to figure that out. So it set me off on a course of wanting to try and find, what am I going to do? And I'm 12, 13. And so every year I would kind of, raise that question. And by the time I was 17, I was a senior in high school, boiled it down to three choices. Get a job, not a career, a job, hopefully with benefits. That's what everybody else in my family did. Go to the service, which men in my family had, served in the Army and the Marines. Or this one that was really foreign to me was the opportunity to go to college. Now, I had no idea how, what that would do. I just thought it was a cool option. Didn't know anybody that went to college. And in my family, I can honestly tell you, we never, ever talked about education and the importance of that. So this idea of college was my own. So unbeknownst to my family, I would go to the library every weekend and apply for colleges. And back then, you'd have to pay $30, $40 with each application. And I had a little job and, submitted it all, submitted the money orders, didn't have a checking account. And by the time that was done, and by the way, I didn't tell anybody because, my second option was to go to the service. Again, as a young person, 17, I don't have any guidance. My father's not in the home. My mother's just trying to keep us, surviving. And so I applied to 16 schools. All 16 of them turned me down. And they say that I'm not college material. Now, mind you, I only had a 2.5 GPA. And that was not because I didn't have the aptitude, but my understanding was that a C pass. So why would I work to get an A or B? The goal is to pass. So my whole high school, career, I was a C student, and never failed a class, never, and I ran track and played football. So anyway, long story short, all the schools turned me down. One school then at the bottom said, if you'd like to discuss this decision, give us a call and set up an appointment. So I did, again, all by myself. No one knows in my family that I'm doing this. And then they set up the appointment and go up there. First hurdle, we don't own a car. Up until that point, I was on public transportation everywhere. But my buddy had just gotten his driver's license, and so we skipped school. Don't recommend that to kids, but it was a defining point in my life. We skipped school, unbeknownst to our parents, and drove the 2.5 hours up there. And basically, I begged them to give me an opportunity because, that wasn't who I was. All I needed was someone to believe in me. And they still said no. But then they said, hey, you deserve our best. You made the effort to come up here by yourself without your parents. Imagine that. 17-year-old going up, to try and get into college, totally by yourself. So long story short, 2 weeks later, I get a letter saying, congratulations, you've been admitted on probation. If you can take 12 credit hours, you can get a C average. We'll consider you for admission. And they said a C, and I was like, oh, I'm a C guy. That's my sweet spot. I can do this. And so I was able to get through that first semester. I had every financial, academic challenge that you can imagine. It's a whole nother story. I wrote about it in a book once I embraced my journey. But long story to say, I did graduate in 4 years and became a president of student government, first Black homecoming king at that school that was 97% white in rural Michigan. And just had a transformative experience. And then a few years later, went on to Michigan State to get a master's degree. But here's where the reason why I tell you that story, and as my fellow panelists talked about the importance of education, I had no idea that getting that degree would put me on a trajectory that would not only change my life, but would change my family's life. Because now you got the first person to not only go to college, but get a degree. And so my commitment back to my family was to showing them how, that got me out of the hood, but it also allowed me to take a whole different track. And I'll just say that 25 years later, I received a Distinguished Alumni Award from Saginaw Valley State University. And actually 2 years after that, delivered the commencement to about 15,000 people from the same university that didn't want me to, originally denied me admission. I share that brief story to say that we don't look like our stories. Organizations need to figure out how to embrace individuals so they could bring their whole selves to work. So when I think about diversity and inclusion, and a lot of times it gets really complicated in the definitions, I try and keep it simple. Diversity to me means valuing the differences that each of us bring to the table. And inclusion means creating a culture where everyone has an opportunity to be successful. So as you think about upward mobility, you've got to create a culture that individuals can bring their whole selves to work. They can navigate through, and the culture embraces them for who they are. And that takes something that there's a part of that that's on the organization, but that's also a part of that is on the individual. And I'll close with this quote from Brene Brown. When we deny our stories, they define us. When we own our stories, we get to write a brave new ending. So just remember that as you think about creating a culture of upward mobility, allowing people to be authentic and to own their own stories.
Thank you, Billy. I love that. Talk about tenacity too. And the hope is, right, that the university starts to learn from experiences like yours, where, they almost lost someone that was incredibly valuable to them in the long run. So hopefully that's a good life lesson for them, as well as all of that you went through. So you had an opportunity to be in this current career space for a long time. And
Yes.
Victoria, you are just entering the corporate world. So Victoria, what has your personal experience been around social mobility?
My personal experience is that social mobility, especially in the US, is far from where it could be. Many of us hold a bias against those who struggle without understanding the barriers in which that prevents them from moving upward. I personally experienced lower chances for growth. Many people like me who are impoverished, particularly minorities, are taught from a young age that the odds are completely stacked against you. I never thought I could be a business professional working in an office. Even with my own communities, there wasn't very many people of color that have careers that society as a whole respects. Even entry-level jobs are looked down upon and seen as very much less valuable than other positions. As a cashier, I was a cashier for about 2 years. I gained intimate knowledge of the supplemental programs like WIC and EBT and how they're failing for so many. It isn't a lap of luxury, as some people may describe, as the income requirements for assistance are very low. They don't cover nearly as many enough expenses as customers still paid out of pocket for food when they used up all their benefits. The work conditions I also experienced were unfavorable, such as overtime requests were constant even while I was in college. I struggled to get time off for events such as funerals. Demand was extremely high while pay was very low. I had to work through all of it because there wasn't many options for me. My family couldn't financially support me at all. They could only afford to house me. I worked fast food. I spent an entire summer to save $800 just for college books and supplies. I was desperately looking for a way up and felt severe neglect and isolation from the very society that told me if I just worked hard, I would get everything that I needed. My parents have been working hard too. Both have jobs. My father has a degree and my mother has her master's degree, but we still needed EBT to make ends meet. This isn't an issue of hard work or pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. It comes down to our biases and discrimination with job-seeking opportunities. I'm one of the very lucky few who've been able to be picked up or reached out to by Aon. As you imagine, I didn't think I could get the life I was working for. I was struck by illness, barely affording my own bus ticket to get to my college. I tapped out. I was depressed, dejected, and beaten down. One intimate fear of mine that I share here is that I was afraid I would never be able to afford to raise a child one day. I would only consider children if I could provide for them better resources than I had growing up. I am now an HR apprentice with a 6-month rotation, earning a degree through the Aon Apprenticeship program, all because they are lending their strength and power to accomplish my dreams in having a career, navigating a new path that comes clearer every day. Through 6 months of interviews, skill assessments, placement exams, and more to make sure I was the right fit for this program. Without the apprentice program, I'd still be cashiering with hostile conditions, wondering if I could ever move out, afford my own family one day. I encourage you to find on your own firms to inspire others to see the value in the programs that like the apprenticeship program. It brings diversity of not only age, color, and background, and many more labels that we have upon each other, of people who want to break into this industry. Every year, and every day, I hope you talk about diversity and inclusion in your firms, but talking about it only benefits the people who are already sitting next to you. Let us include these untapped talent pools and make upward mobility and not wait for it to happen. I'll pass it back to you, Kelly.
Thank you, Victoria. And I think that's a really powerful quote, that only talking about it benefits the people sitting next to you versus expanding the people around you. What a powerful story, and you've made it here. So congratulations. And Aon is very lucky to have you. So now let's go to Steph, who has her own social mobility journey to tell. Steph, you entered the business world some time ago, and you've made significant changes to your own kind of approach to the business world. So tell us what your experience has been.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Kelly. And, thank you, Billy and Victoria, for sharing those really powerful stories. As Kelly says, I'm a bit further along in my social mobility journey. I've been at Aon now for 15 years. I wanted to share my story because I think, I probably am quite a good example now of what's possible. Relative to where I've come from, I really have I've achieved a great deal. At the same time, though, my story probably highlights some of the challenges of a social mobility journey, some of those pitfalls. But before that, I kind of wanted to just share a little bit about my own journey, a bit of my context, a bit of my background. So I'm from a low-income household. My mum was a single parent. She was unemployed. She was an alcoholic. She had significant mental health issues. Growing up, we went out without the basics, food, clothes. We didn't always have somewhere to live. When we did have somewhere, we wouldn't have electricity, heating, running water. My mum struggled to look after herself. It pretty much made it impossible for her to provide, a safe and secure environment for us to grow up in. I was exposed to situations that no child should be. At the same time, the school side of things were pretty sort of bleak as well. There were very low expectations for us at my school. But to be honest, we didn't even always go. My mum was often, on occasion she'd be too drunk to take us, or she wouldn't have enough money to put petrol in the car, gas in the car. When I left school having failed every single exam, and I got a job earning minimum wage. So that's where I started. That's a little insight into where I came from. Now, there's a long story I could tell you if I had more time, about how I managed to change all that. I managed to take control and change my future. I haven't got time to go through all that today, but eventually I ended up at Aon 15 years ago, and really that's where my life started to change. I wanted to talk just a little bit about my journey since joining Aon. So, with that background that I described, when I arrived at Aon, I had, an absolute crippling lack of confidence, perhaps understandably, really. I had no self-belief. I've grown up in an environment where no one else had belief in me, so why should I have any belief in myself? I had what I now understand to be imposter syndrome. In fact, I was so convinced that Aon had made this huge error. It had actually been a big mistake that they'd hired me. That it was like my first week at Aon, sort of 15 years ago, and I had a call from HR that I didn't answer because I was so terrified that they were calling me to tell me that, could you please leave the building? We didn't really mean to hire you. In actual fact, they were just calling me for some information for payroll. But I was convinced. But also at that time, the other thing I did was I made, looking back on it now, two really bad assumptions. So the first assumption I made was I assumed that there was no one else like me at Aon. I assumed that everybody else had come from privilege. And the second assumption I made was I assumed that in order to be successful at Aon, I needed to hide who I was. I needed to never talk about my past. I needed to absolutely hide my true self and do everything I could to fit in. Okay. Now, those two assumptions were not based on any evidence whatsoever. There was nothing really that should have made me have those assumptions at all. They were just absolutely based on, my own preconceptions, my own insecurities. What happened next really was I created a version of myself. I spent loads of energy to maintain a facade, this sort of version that I thought would be successful. And I never talked about my past. I kept that covered. Now, as you can imagine, that took a huge amount of energy. That was exhausting. It also meant that, if I had a different perspective on something at work, I'd keep it to myself. If there was an opportunity, I wouldn't volunteer. I just didn't want to step outside my comfort zone. I didn't want to be noticed. The result of all of this was, frankly, I wasted the first few years of my career. I just wasted it trying to be something else, not being my true self. And it wasn't until, a few years into my career, I found a mentor, an amazing person who helped me to see that actually what I'd achieved so far, given where I'd come from, was actually something to be really proud of, rather than ashamed of. And rather than focusing on my shortcomings, what I couldn't do, a lack of confidence, a lack of self-belief, I should absolutely be positive about, what I could do. That my experiences had actually made me really resilient. It made me really hardworking, given me a grit and determination that meant that I was an absolute asset. My mentor also helped me understand, of course, that I wasn't the only person from this type of background, of course, but also that I was valued. I was valued for being me. And honestly, like the heaviest weights being lifted from my shoulders, ever since that, the world has absolutely opened up and really reflected in my journey since then. I've enjoyed career opportunities, progression. I've developed as a person, and really, I just keep going. I think the sort of moral of my story, the sort of the takeaways I'd love to sort of finish on are just two things. So we each have the power to change our path. I'm happy to talk to anyone that wants to hear about how the many ways in which anyone can do that. But also, never be anything but yourself. Kelly, back to you.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you. What a powerful story. Thank you all for sharing all of that really powerful stories. So now, with about 18 minutes left in our session, I want to switch focus to our audience today. For those of us listening, how can we all be allies and how can we challenge the status quo? Katherine, can you start us off?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kelly, and thanks for those amazing stories. I think they're so powerful, and difficult to tell. So thank you for sharing. So I guess for me, there are a few practical actions. A few have been covered already, but really we all need to review those biases and just to remember that it is human nature to have biases. We all have them, but sometimes too many biases can creep in when we think about those from different socioeconomic backgrounds. There's affinity bias, so we prefer or like those who are like us, similar to ourselves. And that perception bias, Billy talked about making assumptions. Perception bias is forming assumptions or stereotypes about certain groups. We've just heard from Steph, from Billy, and from Victoria how those assumptions and perceptions have been completely blown apart. So we just need to reflect on our own biases and those assumptions that we might make. We don't look like our stories, as Billy says. There's something deeper, something behind that. So think about our biases and assumptions as well about appearances. Think about where people's backgrounds, where they may have come from. And as people start in their careers, or when you're interviewing, or when you're, first talking to people from different backgrounds, think about your assumptions about their appearances. Maybe it's tattoos that you don't like. Maybe it's the way their clothing, or the way they wear their hair, or piercings, or whatever. We're encouraging authenticity. Steph's just talked about the importance of being able to be your authentic self in the workplace. We need to change our mindsets about how we judge or perceive others. And the theme about Dive In this year is building braver cultures. This week means that we all need to move more out of our comfort zone. We need to be braver. We need to be move into the slightly uncomfortable zone, or the learning zone, as I call it. So being comfortable, hiring someone for fit, or focusing on those colleagues who are like me, doesn't bring diversity of perspective, the different voice, the challenge, the innovation, the creativity that we want to get. It's the safer option to focus on people like us, not the braver option. So as Victoria said, it's really important that we include all, that we respect all, and we don't make assumptions. And I think for me, being an ally is really important. That's about being a visible and vocal supporter of those who are different to you, and be an upstander, not a bystander. Step up, step in, and include everyone. Make sure every voice is heard. We can all advocate for the underrepresented. Bring them into the conversation, be their advocate. We know what equality means, treating everyone the same, but we also need to think about equity. And equity ensures that we treat people differently according to their needs to ensure equitable outcomes. Think of that mentor that Steph said had that defining moment for her in her life. Think about how we can, step up and support people who are different, because people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds may need more support, as Steph did. They're more likely to lack that self-confidence and maybe struggle with imposter syndrome. And actually, we can all do more. They're less likely to ask for a promotion or pay rise, but make it your role to provide whatever support is necessary and encourage others to do the same. So be their ally and have patience. I'd say that's my final point. Have patience. In every person there is potential. And I'm going to say that again, in every single person there is potential. We can't judge just on appearances or what we see. Our stories are deep within us. And it's nobody's fault where they were born, or where they grew up, or how they were raised, or the challenges that they've had on their way. That's not their fault. And we should not judge. So we need to take time, be more patient, be more accepting, and allow and encourage all potential to shine, I guess. Back to you, Kelly.
Thank you, Katherine. I love it. Well, that's wonderful. I want to open it up for our other panelists to add anything to what you've just said, Katherine, in terms of how we can be allies, how we can continue to challenge the status quo. And then simultaneously, let's go ahead and open it up for questions from our audience as well. So you should be able to type in your question. And assuming I have the correct application on my phone, I should be able to monitor them. And if I don't, I will ask for help. But please ask away, and I will get our questions to our panelists.
Yeah, Kelly, I just wanted to add one quick thing that when Katherine was talking, that really reminded me of that this point that we've talked about, that we don't look like our own stories, and I think what Steph and Victoria would probably agree with this, is that one of the things that when you're going through this, the last thing is that you want is anyone to feel sorry for you about where you started. And so I think it's important that people that want to be allies don't approach it that way. I mean, we have accepted where we started, but what we want is for you to not to define us by where we started. Okay, it took me almost 25 years to embrace my story. And part of it was that I didn't want you to know how things started for me, but I wanted you to know where I was at today, and that I could be counted on and that I can contribute. And so that's one thing. And then the second thing, which I heard in the other stories as well, is that for the outside looking in, when you're going through it, you don't think that you're doing something amazing, that you're accomplishing this feat that people would just be in awe of. You're living your life and you're just trying to make it. Um, and it took me years for people to say, "Oh my God, at 17, you did all this, and now look at you, you're executive." And I was just trying to do what I could to survive. And it took me years to figure out, one, to embrace that story, and then to realize that that journey that I had was something that, well, one, I was blessed, but I had to figure out, how do I help other people and share insights so they can have the same courage? I had a chance to do a commencement at the University of Phoenix a few years ago, and so as I was walking out, this 90-year-old woman who was in a wheelchair, she asked me to come over, and she said to me, and she put her hand on my face, which I thought was a little weird. She said, "Thank you for blessing me today. These young people need to hear your story of resilience. You defied the odds because you wanted an education." Now, as I'm going through that, I didn't know that. I'm just trying to survive. But again, I stick by my statement. We don't look like our stories.
I love that. Thank you, Billy. So one question is about how you kind of bring up the topic of social mobility to those around you. And is there a way that you would suggest for someone, let's say, that you're working with, how should they broach the topic?
I think I can take this one, Kelly.
Thanks, Victoria.
So for me, it comes a bit naturally once you get to know a person, to understand their background and where they come from. I think it's very important, even if it is super personal. If you do get to that level with your colleague, it's something that it just, for me, is a way to understand them better on that personal level when you have a luncheon with them, to know what their life was like. So as for someone who's not comfortable sharing their stories, or for someone who doesn't know how to ask about someone's story like that, the best way I feel to go about it is just reading how they respond to smaller questions, because they may not be ready to answer them for you. Just like, oh, well, how's the family? How, and then you get to know them a little bit of that background. Most people are very easy to tell you, oh, I have a kid, I have a husband, I have a wife. But then later on, they might be able to tell you, well, how do you feel about this, that, and the other, and going on in the world today, or going on in your company? And that's how you get to know things. You don't ever really directly say, what's your economic status? That makes people feel very uncomfortable. That makes people feel very, like you're trying to pick apart them. But I think it should be an important part of getting to know someone, just to go about that diversity, not to tokenize them as this other person. To know that all these things that they accomplish beside you also comes from something else. So I think that's the simplest way to go about it.
That's powerful and such tangible advice. I like that because it's practical and helps all of us kind of broach the topic easily. So thank you, Victoria. I'm still looking for questions in the chat, but do any of you want to speak to Steph? You talked about kind of imposter syndrome and what that feels like. What about those of us who, may have people on our teams that are quiet or who don't feel like they have a ton of confidence? How would you suggest kind of bringing that out of them, if you will?
I mean, yeah, sure, Kelly. I mean, it's a difficult one. I mean, I just think listening to my fellow panelists there, the image that was coming to mind, or the thing that often comes to mind in my own role as a people manager actually, is this one of an iceberg. And apologies, many of you may have heard this already, but the idea of an iceberg, which is this huge thing, but actually relatively a small amount is above the surface and a huge amount is below the surface. And when I think about that, I'm often thinking about that when I'm engaging with other people, because we're all icebergs, right? You are judging me right now by the sound of my voice, by what I'm saying, by how I look right now, and probably the stuff that's behind me. You're making a judgment. That's what you're saying above the waterline, the top of my iceberg. But actually, my fears, my worries, the fact that I'm wearing trainers, this is all below the waterline. It's all the things you can't see. My work list, my personal, drama, everything else, all of that stuff. I'm not presenting to you. I'm choosing not to share that with you right now. And I feel like it's a really useful model to think about when engaging with colleagues, when managing colleagues, to hold that in your mind that actually there's so much more going on. And we just need to, be patient and engage and ask the questions and be there and create this culture where people feel they can share. It's the best we can. Personally, that's my approach. I think it's the best sort of method that we can sort of be inclusive leaders.
I love that. Thank you. We have a few questions coming in the chat, and I realize we only have 1 minute left. So, Billy, I see someone is also from Detroit, Michigan. They've asked how they go from kind of being in middle in their career to advancing. And then one question for you, Victoria: if you had to make a change in your life, what would that be, and what could others do to enable it? So these are two good questions, and in 1 minute, can you each answer?
Yes. So going from Detroit, I would just say one of the things that we have a common connection for those of us that are from Detroit, and that common connection is that people don't expect us to make it because we've got to get through so many things. But those of us that do have this thing called grit. And that's, people are dealt with a lot of different things. We've learned how to deal with that. We've set goals. One of the things that drove me that I got from growing up in the inner city of Detroit was this three words that sustained me. Why not me? And so I used that early on, and I used it today in my career, setting goals to go after what I want, to see things that you want to accomplish, but understand what does it take to get there. And
Awesome.
that's the advice I would get, is set goals.
Thank you. Thanks, Billy. And we'll close it out with Victoria.
All right. This question is a little difficult for me. As to what I would change, even as I did struggle growing up, I honestly find it hard to say what one thing specifically I would ever change if I had the power to change it. A lot of it does come down to financial stability, but again, a lot of that gave me the drive that I wanted to be able to achieve more instead of it already being there for me. So I don't know if I would even change that because as I look back on my years of growing up, I had a lot of things to be thankful for. I don't really look back at it with scrutiny, um, but to enable others to look and not be silent even when it comes to other issues in our world, many of the same things come by is stop being a bystander. If you see something, say something, comes up all the time. When you know that your classmate is struggling next to you and doesn't have anything to eat, as I once did, do something about it. And people that I knew closely at that time did. And that's what helped bring me here. So I really advocate for the people you care about. Don't have just surface level conversations. Make sure you know everyone on a level where you can say, oh, I know that this person is going to be here at this time and it's unusual for them not to be here today. And maybe I should check in on them. That is what makes a huge difference with any kind of problem that we ever face as people.
I love it. Well, if you take one thing away then from today's session, it's don't be silent, speak up, and challenge the status quo. We can all do that. So once again, thank you to all of our panelists. You have amazing stories. I love the passion, and I hope it continues. Thanks very much.